Hi guys, this is another exciting tutorial because we're going to use the multiplayer service for the first time. It's been around in sort of development version, but now it's getting into sort of middle ground where the API is more or less stable, the implementation is alright kind of thing, and hopefully we can use it and see how we can improve it in the future as well. It will be available as part of 11.16. This is the FXGL version. Currently using the development snapshot version because 11.16 is not yet out. By the time this video is out, you should be able to just replace this with that, and it should all be fine. Right, one of the first things to note, this is still the 3D example that I started. We've done two parts. We have this at the moment, a moving platform that can collect these so-called crystals. And there's a bit of animation going on. The only thing you'll need to change is this thing in the settings. It was previously called Set Experimental 3D. It's no longer experimental, it's going to stay, so just get rid of the experimental word. And this is part of the 11.16 API change. Everything else should just run as normal. Okay, so the first thing to do is the idea. The idea is I'm going to add a second player who's able to do the same thing as the first player, and I think that is it. We're not going to make this any more complex than it already is. So I'm going to start removing some stuff. This prism thing we don't really need. Just get rid of that. In fact, I might remove the camera animation as well. So we're going to have this ground platform, our player platform, and the player platform is able to collect these things, and that is it. Crystal platform, crystal removed from world, add score, and that is it. I'm going to comment out the camera animation thing, so it's as simple as it can be. Okay, that's good. So we collect crystals, we get an increased score, and that's it. Right. So how do you transform a single player game to a multiplayer game in FXGL, or how do you build a multiplayer game using the multiplayer service? First step, add the service, because it's not added by default, since not all games by default are multiplayer games. It should be as simple as settings, add engine service, multiplayer service dot class. It's it's here. It comes from this package. If for some reason you can't access this package, that means you're not using the latest FXGL version. It's 11.16 and higher. I say higher because in the future versions will update. So I'm kind of future-proofing this tutorial. Right, so we've added the service. Next thing to do is have a look at your factory class. Factory class is the class where you create your entities. So we've got spawn crystal, okay, we've got spawn ground and spawn platform. We don't want prism. I added it last time just to show custom shapes and so on, but we already are familiar with custom shapes. So I'm going to remove it, which means there are only three object types. We have crystal, ground, and platform. Now, for each of these entities, we should add a thing called new network component. So each entity that you're creating that you want also on the other side of the connection, because you know we're now going to spawn two applications. One is server, the other is client. We can go up to n number of clients, but I'll use just a simple example of one server, one client. So for each entity that you want on the server that will also spawn it on the client, you will need to add this network component, which is a new thing. Again, it comes from this package, this one, the multiplayer package. If you can't access it, again, check your version. Add it right here and here. So all three entity types now have the network component attached to them. That's good. Which means you're able to spawn both on the server and on the client. We now, at the start of the game, will need to ask the instance or the user whether they're the host, aka server, or the client. So we are going to, after just a short while, say half a second, we're going to ask the user, get dialog service, show confirmation box. We can use confirmation box because it's a yes and no box essentially. Are you the host? And then the callback is the Boolean, whether the user selected yes or they selected no. If yes, then they are the server, else they are the client. So we're able now to control the flow of code for each individual endpoint of the connection, although it's the same code, the same program. So all of that goes into the server code. Let's add on server, on client. I mean, we can rename those, but for now, I just want some basic distinction happening. I'll let IntelliJ figure this out. Create a method. Yep. Create another one. The stuff that we had, we're going to copy paste into server. Get game world, add entity factory. Now, this thing is needed for both because we're creating entities on both sides. So this is common code that I'm going to add here. I'm now trying to sort of extract bits that are common and bits that are specific to the server. Camera is on both ends, though the transform is going to be different for player 1 and player 2. So camera, it's on both sides, but depending on if we're the client or the server, we're going to translate the camera in a different way. So on the server, let's put the camera where it was before. So -10, that's upwards. 5x is that way, to the right. And let's do the client being, again, -10 upwards, and then -5. So we're going to place the camera on the left for the second player. Spawn ground, and then once we spawn the ground, we're going to make the camera look at that thing. Now, this is where things get interesting, and we need to set up our sender-receiver type things. So this is where the multiplayer API comes in. Let's focus on the client first. So on the client, we need get service, MultiplayerService class. You can see there are a bunch of functions related to receiving and sending. These are there to simplify the replication. So you don't actually need to manually manage your entities or inputs or events. And that's great. Like, you can call functions on your server, or it doesn't matter, on your client, And you can expect FXGL to replicate all the stuff that you're doing on one machine on another machine. At least that's the idea behind the multiplayer service. So add entity replication receiver, because the client is the thing that will receive entity replication. The server will have the entities. There's no need to replicate the server entities on the server because it's storing it locally. So you can see that we need the connection and then the game world. Okay, so we need to figure out how to get the connection to the other end. It's connection bundle. Connection comes from this package, bundle comes from this package, and then this is going to represent the actual connection between the two, or I suppose the other machine. How do we obtain that? So if we selected the server, then we are going to get networking service, new TCP server. Yeah, let's use TCP, and then just some random port. I normally use this because it's easy to memorize. So we've got the server. Server set on connected when there is a new connection. We're going to assign the connection to the reference that we are holding over there. And we probably want to actually do this over here before we call on server, because we don't want to initialize the game immediately. We want to wait until there is a connection and afterwards do this. So we've got the connection now. Now, set on connected is a callback. It doesn't do anything immediately. So we need to actually start listening for incoming connections. Start asynchronously. That looks good. And then let's immediately do the same thing on the client. Get net service, new TCP client, localhost, because we're connecting to our own machine, and we're using this IP. Sorry, the same port. Right, connect asynchronously. But before we do that, we need to add another set unconnected. Again, store the connection, because notice that this will run only on the server, this will run only on the client. So these are actually two different applications running. At first, it's hard to think about this because it's like having the same file, but in two different contexts. But once you can mentally organize that this is the code to run only on the server, this is only on the client, then it becomes clearer. And this is version 1 of the API, so it might actually improve in the future and get even more concise if that's possible. So on server, we're spawning these things. On client, we're also doing this thing. Add entity replication receiver. So now we've got the connection, right? We've got the connection to the server in this reference. And it's initialized before we call on client. So at this point in time, we have connection. And we just said game world. Again, this is something that can already be provided because we know that it's going to be this game world. So in the future, there might be a domain-specific language, DSL API, on top of the multiplayer service API, which allows you to say basically add entity replication receiver, and then you provide just the connection because we don't need this bit really. And then we'll do the input. So currently I want to do just one thing that can then run, demonstrate that it actually works, and then we're going to add the input. Is there anything else I need to do? Right, let's talk about how spawn works. Well, locally, as you're probably already familiar because it has been around for quite a long time, we call spawn to tell FXGL to call one of these entity types kind of factory methods. But this is going to spawn an entity locally. So how do we do that on the other end? Well, we access the multiplayer service and we say spawn, for which we need connection, entity, and entity name. So we need three things. Connection, we have it, because by that time the server has already initiated the connection and stored the reference. The entity, we also have it because we spawned it locally. And then entity name, which is this thing. Again, in the future, I might be able to figure out a way to grab this ground as an entity name somehow from the spawn method so that you don't have to repeat this. Init physics. Okay, so physics needs to only run on the server, right? Yeah, I'm going to just take this out somewhere over here so it doesn't interfere with what we're doing right now. Let's move this to on server because collisions only happen on the server side. Client does nothing. Client just draws all the information given by the server. Just G. Yeah. These are collisions. That is fine. That is fine. In fact, let me just extract this. Control-Alt-M. There we go. Init collisions. Control-Alt-M extracts the code that you selected into a new method. So it's easier to think about that in this structure. So we've spawned ground, right? We have to do this for every entity that we spawn on the server. So this is platform, the type is platform. And we also have this crystal that we spawn. We need to store the reference and crystal. I don't think we are spawning anything else in this game. It's a reasonably simple game. We've only got a few things. Good. Now, is there anything else I need to think about? There's currently one platform, that's fine. We're going to choose another platform, player 2, in a minute. Okay, let's run this. Oh, before we do that, go to run and then edit configurations, because we need to allow IntelliJ to run it in parallel. So if you go to Crystal app, which is the thing that we're running, the application name, modify options, and then click here, this one, allow multiple instances, so you can see it here, and then apply. This will allow you to run multiple instances of the same application in IntelliJ. That means I can click on this button twice, and it's not going to shut down the first. Are you the host? Yes, because, wait, what? Oh, okay, I'm going to shut it down because I made a mistake. It's not supposed to be run, it's supposed to be run once, because we don't want, you know, you don't want to ask this question every time. Are you the host? Yep, we are the host. Now I can click on this button again. So on the left, I've got the server. On the right, I'm going to have the client. If I click no, it should have connected. Appears not. TCP client. Okay, something, it did connect, it just crashed. That's fine. Not on FX application thread. We did something that wasn't supposed to happen on the background thread. Okay, so this thing runs on the background thread, but this thing doesn't run on, is supposed to run on the JavaFX thread. It's easy to fix because FXGL provides this thing, get executor, and we can run asynchronously on the JavaFX thread. And I assume we need to do something similar with this too on the client. Okay, let's do this again. This is the server, and we are going to get the client now. Cool. So on the left, we've got the server. On the right, we've got the client. So the camera on the client is positioned awkwardly because we haven't actually done anything with it. On the server, everything is correct. We can actually play the game. We can destroy these things, and these should, we can even see our platform over there. How cool is that? We can't really do much on the, from the client side's perspective because the input, we haven't done anything with input. But on the server, what we're doing gets replicated on the client just like that because FXGL multiplayer service. Right, now shut down client, shut down server. You might see some warnings because the connection, well, it's still trying to send something, but the connection has died without really exiting because we kind of forcefully shut down the application. That's fine. We're not worrying about that, not in this tutorial. Okay, let's position, or I suppose let's spawn the second platform. So that's one thing to do. We need to position the camera properly on the client. That's number 2. Number 3 is we need input on both sides. So player 1 on the server controls the player platform. Player 2 on the client controls its own platform. So instead of just platform, I'm going to rename this to player 1 and then player 2. So this is going to control player 1. And we need another input object. Let's call it client input. Can we create new input over here? I think we can. And then we're going to key. Now this DSL on key doesn't take input. It makes an assumption that you want the FXGL's kind of normal input. We don't want that on the client, or at least we don't want that on the server. Well, we don't want it on the server either. So we need a new input object, which is going to control player 2. So we're going to have something similar to this. But in order to do that, we need to use key builder, which does take the input object. Client input, then key code, which is again going to be exactly the same, which is good. On action, it's the same thing, but for player 2. And let's repeat this 3 times. This is S, this is A, and this is D. This is translate, this is minus speed, this is minus speed, this is translate X, and they're all binding to the client input. Yeah, good. Right, so we need to spawn player 2 somewhere. This is player 1 spawning. Let's do player 2 as well. We're going to spawn the player 2 platform on a different level. Something like that. So that there is a separation so that we can see the 2 different platforms. This is player 2. Again, we also copied the multiplayer service spawn, so it gets spawned on the other end as well. That's all good. Now for the bit that will replicate input. On client, again, it's get service, multiplayer service, add, input replication, sender, because it's the client's input that gets sent to the server. Connection object, we have it. Input get input, right? Because from the client's code perspective, its get input is the thing that receives input. So this is where it can get tricky. It might help if you kind of draw some things on a piece of paper so you can clearly see which objects belong to which machine. So on the client, so this code should only run on the server, right? On the client, if we're going to try and run this, we're going to get into trouble because player 1 on the client doesn't exist. On the client, nothing exists. It's only drawing things that exist on the server. So I wonder if we, on the client, just need to set player 1 to some dummy entity. Now that we added this replication sender, we need to have replication receiver on the server from the server code. Somewhere here, add input replication receiver from this connection into client input object. So the code that runs input on the client is going to be replicated into this object, which will in turn move player 2. Player 2 gets moved, its state gets updated, its state is going to be sent back to the client because there is a receiver for entity replication on the client. Yeah, that makes sense. Shall we try this? Host on the right, on the left, and client on the right. Okay, so we've got two platforms. That's good. It's really good. And we can see platform 1 on the client. Just move this closer. Now I'm going to switch to the client and use WASD, but it doesn't do anything. Okay, so we need to fix that. So on client, add input replication sender. I'm just trying to read any error messages. There are none. Okay, that's good. Input receiver connection, client input. It should be receiving it into here. Action. Oh, I think I know what the issue is. I think we simply need to update input on the server side. So if we're the server, how do we know if we're the server? Let's add a boolean. Is server. And it's set all the way over here. If is server, client input on update. This is actually not something related to multiplayer per se. In fact, it's not related to multiplayer at all. Client input is an input object, and because it's not an FXGL provided input object, which is obtainable by just doing this get input, which is managed by FXGL, you'll notice that here we created our own input object, which we have to manage ourselves, which is why we have to do the unupdate manually. Otherwise, it does nothing. So my guess is input replication happened correctly. We just didn't do anything with the result. So I'm moving this one over here, and I'm moving that one over there. Nice. Collisions work, everything works, it seems. Yeah, it's quite cool. So the last thing to do is just fix the camera on the client. So the view, so that they both, well, the view is going to be different anyway, because we move the camera slightly differently, just for the sake of it, so that we're not, you know, we're already looking from this angle in player 1's game. Anyway, this works, that's great. And it's good that I encountered these kind of minor issues, so you can see how to deal with them if you encounter them. Right, well, this should be easy. Camera should be easy, right? Maybe. Because here on the server, we're positioning camera to look at the ground. Well, we know what the ground coordinates are. It's these. So let's just position camera, get transform, look at this 3D point. That's it. Done. Now that's actually pretty cool. Like, you could even change the camera position like all the way forward and then to the left, so that they're looking at the ground from different perspectives, as in from different corners of the ground object. That could be interesting, like different corners. So this is player 1. You probably want to change the color as well. That should be reasonably easy to do. Is it? Yeah, it is. Because we are spawning. Yeah, I keep forgetting that all objects only exist on the server, on the left instance of this application. The right-hand side does nothing with logic or anything else whatsoever. It's just getting the data from the server and drawing to the screen. That's it. So if you're into kind of MVC type style architecture, then the model is the server, which has its own view and its own controller. And on the client, there's only the view and the controller. There is no model on the client. So you have MVC, VC kind of thing. And then obviously this can also be done with any 2D game. I just decided to do 3D because I already have a very simple example for 2D. So I wanted to try it out on 3D as well. Plus, the series kind of been going. I've already made 2 videos on simple 3D game, and this is going to be the 3rd one. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. There is the hack commit push event coming up on May 29th, which is going to be 1 day after this video is released. So if you want to participate, feel free. Registration is open and free. The link will be in the video description, and I'll see you guys later.